Hey there. So whether you're brushing up on a little Boston history or just kind of, diving into something new today, get ready to explore Brighton in the 1960s and 70s,
Yeah.
a time of major change, not just for Brighton, but for, like, America as a whole.
It's this little corner of Boston. It's like it became this like microcosm of the era,
Yeah.
reflecting these huge currents of social and cultural transformation that were
Yeah.
like sweeping across the nation.
Okay, so before we jump into the thick of it, like the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
the research mentions that Brighton wasn't always part of Boston.
Right.
In fact, it used to be called Little Cambridge.
Mm.
They even had this whole rivalry going on with Cambridge over bridge tolls.
Oh,
I
wow.
guess some things never change, huh?
That's a great example of how transportation changes a city.
Ah.
Those streetcar lines that came through in the late 1800s,
Yeah.
they weren't just about getting around hominies. They totally reshaped Brighton from farmland into a streetcar suburb.
Wow.
And, we still see the legacy of that today in how our cities are designed.
It's amazing to think about like those streetcars rumbling through where fields used to be.
Right?
It like sets the stage for this time of just immense change in Brighton during the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
We see a real mix of people, working families trying to make ends meet,
Sure.
young professionals drawn by affordable rents, imagine that,
Right.
and of course that ever-present energy of college students.
Of course. Always.
Right.
And that's what makes Brighton in this era so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like looking at a snapshot of America at the time.
Yeah.
This mix of residents mirrors the huge demographic shifts happening across the U.S. after World War II.
Yeah.
The rise of the suburbs, the evolving urban landscape. Brighton becomes a stage for it all.
Wow.
Plus, you have a big influx of Irish-American, Italian-American, and other European immigrants,
Right.
making it even more diverse.
Okay, so we've got this like melting pot of people and change happening in Brighton.
Right.
But what's the story the sources tell about what that actually looked like on the ground? Like if we were to walk through Brighton Center in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
what would we see and feel?
You'd be surrounded by family-run businesses, likely passed down through generations, now facing a new wave of customers.
Right.
Those pubs we talked about, they'd be overflowing with students, young professionals, and maybe even some of those working families looking for a break at the end of a long day.
Yeah, from the sources, I'm getting a sense that Brighton was a place where you knew your neighbors, where those local businesses were like community centers.
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
This is long before the internet and social media, remember?
Right.
Places like Rogers Park Pharmacy, which the source mentions,
Yeah.
or Brighton Bowl.
Yeah.
They weren't just places to shop or bowl, they were where people gathered, shared news, and formed bonds.
You'd grab a newspaper at the pharmacy, chat with the owner, maybe catch a glimpse of your kid's teacher bowling a strike or two down at Brighton Bowl.
Exactly. Those everyday interactions were the glue that held the community together.
Right.
But it's not just about businesses.
Yeah.
Think about those summer evenings at Rogers Park, community events on Brighton Common,
Right.
even a quiet stroll around Chandler Pond. The sources paint a picture of green spaces as the heart of the neighborhood.
It's like that those parks were like the stage for Brighton's story to unfold,
Mhm.
from casual encounters to maybe even a little mischief under the summer night sky.
Right. And you can't forget about those like iconic institutions that really anchor a community.
Yeah.
The sources point to Brighton High School, St. Columkill School,
Mm-hmm.
and even the influence of nearby Boston College.
Right.
You can practically like feel the energy of those hallways,
Yeah.
the anticipation of a Friday night game or a school play.
It's interesting the research also lists a number of churches that were central to Brighton life.
Yeah.
St. Columkill Parish, Brighton Alston Congregational Church,
Mm-hmm.
even St. Gabriel's Monastery. That's
Uh,
quite a mix.
And it speaks to the diverse tapestry of Brighton at the time.
Yeah.
Remember that influx of immigrants we discussed?
Yeah.
Churches often served as like lifelines for these families,
Yeah.
providing not just spiritual guidance, but also vital social services and a sense of belonging in a new country.
Right. So it really highlights how these places of worship were so much more than just buildings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were pillars of support for so many.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, we can't talk about the 60s and 70s without addressing like the wave of activism that swept across America.
Right.
And Brighton, as we've seen, was very much a microcosm of these broader trends.
Yeah, it's easy to think about the civil rights movement or the anti-war protests as something happening out there, but the sources suggest that Brighton had its own share of activism too.
Absolutely. And it's here that I think like The listener can really dig deep and consider the local impact of national issues.
Yeah.
For instance, urban renewal projects, while often intended to improve cities, also displace communities.
Right.
How did Brighton residents respond to those changes?
Yeah, it makes you think about those families, those shopkeepers we talked about, their lives intertwined with the changing landscape of their neighborhood.
Precisely. And consider the rise of youth programs during this era.
Yeah.
They became vital lifelines for young people grappling with social upheaval and uncertainty.
Right.
Why do you think those programs resonated so deeply with the youth of Brighton?
Perhaps they provided a sense of stability and community during a time when things felt anything but stable.
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
And speaking of people, the sources make note of a certain Tip O'Neill,
Mm-hmm.
a major political figure connected to Brighton during this period.
He may not have been a Brighton native, but his influence was certainly felt in the area.
Right, and while prominent figures like O'Neill certainly shape history,
Yeah.
it's important for us to remember that the story of Brighton, like any community, is ultimately about the everyday people.
Yeah.
The shop owners, the teachers, the activists, the families raising their kids. Their stories are woven into the very fabric of the neighborhood.
It's like each generation adds their own verse to the Brighton song, right?
That's a great way to put it. And as we kind of near the end of our deep dive into Brighton's past,
Yeah.
one thing is clear: this neighborhood story is like both unique and universal.
Right.
You know, it captures those broader themes of America in the 60s and 70s, the mix of progress, upheaval, and the constant pulse of change.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how that legacy from the 60s and 70s continues to shape Brighton today. What do you think based on everything we've kind of dug into?
That's the question, isn't it? How does understanding Brighton's past, particularly these like pivotal decades,
Right.
help us understand the challenges and opportunities cities face today? What can we learn from those who came before us as we navigate our own, evolving urban landscapes?
Those are some like profound questions to consider.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of like a deep dive like this. We've given you a glimpse into Brighton's past, but the present and future of this dynamic neighborhood are yours to explore. What will your own deep dive uncover?